right, let's go ahead and get started here. My name is Christopher Sanderson, and I am the Houston Area Chair as well as the Houston South Area Chair for IEEE Region 5. I also wear an additional hat as the NESB Process Improvement SIG Co-Director. I'd like to thank everybody for coming here this afternoon for this great presentation on why ISO 9001 is so important to your organization. We're fortunate to be joined this afternoon in partnership with QSI. Bud Weightman is a professional who's been in the quality business for more than 32 years. Bud is the founder and president of Qualified Specialists LLC, an organization that has been serving the oil and gas industry for more than 40 years. Bud has a unique blend of experience of over 40 years. As an example, he has supported the following industries and business sectors: equipment manufacturing, repair and refurbishment projects, drilling operations, just to name a few. He's also assisted with providing solutions related to project integrity, management systems integrity that considers businesses' needs when deploying management systems, as well as electronic deployment of management systems between company locations geographically located internationally, as well as benchmark assessments of drilling contractors. We are fortunate again to have Bud, and with that introduction, I would like to introduce Mr. Bud Weightman to the discussion.
Hi, everybody. My name is Bud Weightman, and I'm the president of Qualified Specialists with our office here in Houston, Texas. So I'll be giving the presentation today, why is ISO 9001 important to organizations? So we're going to begin with a high-level overview of why ISO 9001 is important. We're going to talk about the definition of a quality management system. We're going to provide you a high-level historic perspective of quality management systems. We're going to go over the historical overview of ISO 9001. We're going to talk about the advent of ISO 9001 2015, and we're going to talk about ISO 9001 2015 being a platform for integrated management systems. That is ISO 9001 working with other management systems. And we're going to talk about how you get the most out of your quality ISO 9001 quality management system. So in this presentation, we're going to look at the overall hierarchy of quality management systems and the evolution. It's going to be a brief rundown of this information so we can ultimately get to how will your ISO 9001 management system work the best for you. So I think it's important to know historically where quality systems came from, so you can see what the progress has been over the years and where ISO 9001 2015 is truly going. So I'm going to answer the questions up front as to why is ISO 9001 important to organizations, and then afterwards we're going to tell you how to get the most out of it. So there's many different reasons why 9001 is important to different organizations. Some of these reasons may be the same reasons that you have. There may be other reasons. So there's a lot of published information on success stories and what people see in the benefits of their quality management system. So it provides a format for the documentation of a quality management system. It's sizable or scalable to different types of organizations, such as larger companies, smaller companies in different industries. It could be for a company that's one person in size, or it could be applied to companies that have thousands of people. It allows for the integration of business processes with processes related to the products or services. So remember those words, right? So what we're looking at is integrating how the business operates with the management system that is built to help ensure quality and reduce customer nonconformities. It could facilitate entry into existing markets, otherwise by expanding your marketplace, or it can help you get into brand new markets. It focuses on a context of your organization, which is basically saying, how big is your organization? It's risk-based. So if you look at past quality management systems, a lot of them were very specific for a single company location. The introduction of the context of the organization is a much broader application. So if you're looking at a company that builds their own tools and they use those tools to do some sort of a service, they may have office locations internationally in 20 or 30 or 40 different countries. That's not uncommon in the oil and gas industry, as an example. ISO 9001 will also be a launch pad for continual improvement and for the integration of other management systems, such as ISO 14001. And there are more, and we'll talk about those management systems in a little bit. So I'm going to start with what is a quality management system. So this is a definition from ASQ. So the quality management system is a mechanism for managing and continuously improving core processes to achieve maximum customer satisfaction at the lowest overall cost to the organization. And if you look at the model for the quality management system, you can see it's very similar to what ISO 9001 model is for the quality management principles. And they cover the relationship management, customers, leadership, engagement or empowerment of people, the process approach, improvement, and evidence-based decision making. So this is just in general for quality management systems, not specifically ISO, although ISO will cover those bases as well. So if you look at implementation of a quality management system, it can be driven by different factors. So there's many different companies have different reasons for putting some sort of a system into place. A lot of companies start with a quality control system. In other words, a system for doing inspection and testing of their product to ensure that the product that goes out to the customer meets the customer requirements. But the implementation could be driven by such things as a high scrap rate, customer complaints, financial loss, the desire to gain market share, the desire to improve, for process performance. Well, what benefits does the system bring? Usually process performance, customer satisfaction, corporate compliance, better communication, reducing nonconformities, as a training system for their new hires, better efficiency, and, for example, improve financials. So if you look at how companies implemented ISO 9001 or quality management systems in the past, it was generally through trial and error. So many companies would go through the trial and error by having third-party audits from their company representatives or their customer representatives, doing internal audits and finding out where the quality management system wasn't working. They really didn't have a systematic way of approaching the implementation of their quality management system. Now, what we're talking about is pretty much years ago. ISO 9001 is pretty famous. However, there's still large sections of different industries that still do not know about ISO 9001. So if you take a look at historically management systems, what did it look like in the modern era? And what I'm calling the modern era is from World War II. So the inspection-based systems, quality control systems, began after World War II. The reason was, as some examples that I've heard through folks that had been through some of this in the early days, was ammunition not being able to fit up with the rifle or even cannons. The systems began with something called MIL Q 9858, and they called them quality program requirements. And there was another MIL standard, I 4520, and it was inspection system requirements. So in other words, there really weren't as many criteria within those systems. These were basic systems to attempt to make sure that product met the requirements of the customer and that the product was usable. The concept grew, the standards evolved, and were integrated into other industries over time. So some of the different ways quality systems grew were in the naval nuclear industry, particularly when they start coming up with the nuclear submarines. And then the quality systems expanded into commercial nuclear power that was mandated by the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations. And then some of these systems moved over to NATO and basically came in through the NATO AQAP programs. So it's the Allied Quality Assurance Publications. And then through the UK Department of Trade and Industry, they came into what is known as BS 5750. And that was used a lot in the North Sea. And the BS 5750 series included the concept of what we later found out or knew in 1987 was ISO 9001, ISO 9002, and ISO 9003. The original ISO 9001 was for companies who did design. The original ISO 9002 was basically for companies that did manufacturing, but they did not design their own products. It might be manufacturing a flange from something like an ANSI standard, American National Standards Institute. And 9003 was for service companies. So then ISO 9001-2000 replaced the ISO 9001, ISO 9002, and ISO 9003 series. And at that point, we had to learn how to incorporate all of the requirements into a single document. And that's what made things interesting when 9001 brought in design for services. So as things grew, it went to ISO 9001-2008, which included clarification from the 2000 version and improved consistency with ISO 14001, 2004. So when you looked at the quality management systems in the past, a lot of them, and in particular for the some of the industries I served, like in the oil and gas industry, it was for a single facility. It was to have recognition to a manufacturing company for the quality management system. And it usually wasn't expanded out far beyond that. There were very few oil and gas companies, as an example, would implement service against ISO 9001. So the evolution was basically in manufacturing. And again, that's going to depend upon the different industries and how the systems actually evolve. So then ISO 9001 2015 was adapted. And over the years coming up to 9001 2015, if you look at 1987, it had the same structure as the UK standard 57. And so basically what they were looking for was just trying to integrate how these systems were going to work here in the United States. And then the earlier versions of ISO were pretty prescriptive in nature, a lot of shells. And if you look at the earlier versions like 1987, it would match some of the other industries standards that are out there, like AS 9100, like the American Petroleum Institute's quality management systems for service and for manufacturing. When you get into the ISO 2000 and 2008 editions, they focus more on managing the processes with less documented procedures. Then when you look at ISO 9001 2015, it's less prescriptive and focuses on performance utilizing the plan, do, check, act cycle. So now we get into the ISO 9001 and 2015. So 2015 adapted to changing business needs internationally. The advances in technology, providing a foundation for growth and sustained success. So really, it's a new era of quality management. It's a quality management system that we really haven't seen before. It's a lot broader than past quality management systems. So why is it different than many other systems? It's not as prescriptive. It's scalable to different types of business in different industries. So it's very easy to modify the wording to fit a very specific business need. It provides a wider range of requirements. It provides a springboard for integrating other initiatives, and it's innovative. What are some of the essential new requirements for 9001? It's basically the process approach is one of them. So the process approach talks about the inputs and outputs of activities. And based upon those inputs and outputs, that will give you the interrelationship between different criteria within ISO 9001. And then you have the plan, do, check, act cycle. And the plan, do, check, act cycle helps understand consistency of meeting the requirements. It's the consideration of process in terms of added value, and it's the achievement of effective process performance and improvement of processes based on evaluation. And then the inclusion of the risk-based thinking is going to depend upon the context of the organization. So if you're going to implement a ISO 9001 quality management system from scratch, it's going to depend upon how broad your company is, what your products and services are, and what the risks are facing your business. So there's also a series of standards. You may have heard of them. It's ISO 31000 risk management guidelines, and that may be useful in designing your approach to risk. And in the family of standards, there are several others. There is a ISO technical report 31004, and those are risk management guidelines. And there's an IEC 31010, risk management, risk assessment techniques. There's a ISO 31022, risk management guidelines for the management of legal risk. And there's a IWA 31, and it's risk management guidelines on using ISO 31000 in management systems. The IEC 31010, the risk management or the risk assessment techniques is quite a useful document because it gives you many different ways to determine risk. So it's quite useful. If you haven't seen it, it might be worth looking up and considering integrating that into your management system. So the results of risk-based thinking could include, now this is from the high-level corporate governance. So that would be meeting things like Sarbanes-Oxley, or the governance of the corporation, the mandatory financial reporting, and business activities that businesses have to report. It could include a proactive culture of improvement, provide mitigation of potential issues with statutory and regulatory requirements, and it can provide consistent product and service quality and improve customer confidence and satisfaction. So having said all this, these things have to be designed into the quality management system. So I can see if you have ISO 9001 2015 does not require a quality manual. However, these processes would have to be introduced into the organization and worked out so it fits the company in order to achieve the results that you want from ISO 9001 2015. So now if you're looking at ISO 9001 2015 and integration, there's a lot of background on this subject, and ISO has replaced the Guide 83 they used to have. Guide 83 discussed the structure of the ISO management system standards. So there's more management system standards in ISO 9001 than just 9001, 14001 for environmental, and ISO 45001 for health and safety. So Guide 83 was replaced with the Annex L, and it's a proposals for the management system standards. So it provides a framework for a generic quality management system. I'm sorry, generic management systems, not just quality. So one thing that I learned recently was that ISO actually had 90 management system standards. You could take a look at those standards if you go to the ISO's homepage and type in the search bar for management system standards, and they'll bring them all up. And there's actually an Excel spreadsheet of them that you can see. Now, based upon Annex L, there's approximately 47 of those standards that align with the format of 9001 2015. So that's quite a few standards. So in other words, the same documentation from ISO 9001 can be used with approximately 47 management system standards if they apply to your organization. So frequently you'll see ISO 9001, ISO 14001, which is environmental, ISO 45001, which is healthy safety, that get combined within companies to form what is referred to as a integrated management system. So these are the sections that ISO 9001 2015 has. And having said that, these are the same sections that you'll find in the other 47 management system standards. So it goes through the scope, the normative references, the terms and definitions, the context of the organization, the leadership, the planning, operation, performance evaluation, and improvement. So where does the difference come in if we talk about 14001? Typically, you'll see a lot of those changes coming in Section 6 for planning and Section 8 for operation, although there could be a variety of footnotes and additional bullet points in other sections. But that would be the difference will be the discipline-specific information for, in the case of 14001, environmental. So this all provides a high-level structure, what ISO refers to as identical core text, and common terms and core definitions. And if you get a chance to look up the different management systems and this Annex L, it's quite lengthy. Very interesting concept. So ISO 9001 2015 is a better match for total quality management system concepts. And so you'll see that there's work that's been done by Duran, by Deming, and there's other total quality management philosophies that are out there. So ISO 9001 2015 is a perfect springboard for those activities. This is where ISO 9001 2015 could also be used for integrating quality with other business processes. So the quality management processes in ISO 9001, as opposed to the ones that you saw in ASQ, are slightly different, but overall, it's basically the same intent. And that's how the standard was planned when they made the revisions. Now, if you take a look at the brief history and you look at how quality management systems stair-stepped over the last 40 years or so, They've gone from inspection systems to quality management systems for manufacturing. The use and the application, not saying that they couldn't be used for something else, but typically in some industries, it was just for a single site, to ISO 9001 2015 that contains much more information for dynamic business situations. And particularly with the pandemic, this is a time where some of the management system criteria needs to be utilized more than others. So if you look at the different catalysts for change, what can bring change to your quality management system? Here's some examples. So new technology. So if you have new technology, perhaps new machinery, new equipment for manufacturing, new equipment for implementing your service, new equipment for communications, all that may change your quality management system in your business. The change in customer requirements, particularly if you get into a new marketplace, market expansion, new markets, new products or services, expanding your current marketplace, mergers or acquisitions, revised external documents, such as codes and standards, implementation of regulatory requirements, and the potential impact from internal and external issues and or interested parties. So if you're going to document those changes, how do you document those changes? And how do you communicate those changes? So 9001 has several ways of doing that. There's going to be changes to documented information that may or may not create a risk for your company or management of change. There is management of change that can be used, but it doesn't say that management of change has to be used for every procedure revision. It would more lend itself to, if the management change is going to create a potential risk, you would want to do a risk assessment, then implement the management of change. And then where necessary, contingency plans could be developed for supplying your product or your services to your customers. So we have the market forces and international forces that are changing your business. This is about how do you integrate those changes into your business. And this is some of the areas where you may want to integrate the changes. So when you start thinking about these next several items, think about what type of change you might have to make. So that would be in the context of your organization, primarily if you have active sales and marketing and you're looking at different regional areas to get into, different product lines, different services. And I think, this pandemic is causing a lot of companies to reinvent themselves. Your strategic direction, it's important. So you may change strategic direction. That may go with the context of the organization. The direction may change the context. You may have internal and external issues. So what types of things would fall under internal and external issues? Internal issues may relate to your stakeholders. They may be legal related issues. They could relate to partners in the company, which may not be stakeholders, financial partners. External issues could be regulatory issues, changes in regulatory requirements. That could mean changes in codes and standards, which I think is coming up here. Interested parties, possibility of new interested parties, possibility of interested parties reorganizing, such as regulators, and expanding their reach into different areas. And if you look at the oil and gas marketplace, which we serve quite a bit, based upon Deepwater Horizon accident in 2010, many changes came about based on that. Potential changes to your quality policy, changes to your quality objectives. As I talked about a little bit earlier, the possibility of statutory and regulatory requirements being changed, changes of external standards. So when you look at these kind of things, so what are we talking about when we talk about external standards? So if you have any upcoming changes in ISO 9001, those changes would have to be evaluated. A lot of companies use a gap analysis process to do that, to see how their quality management systems documented today versus changes that are coming tomorrow and what they may have to change in their quality management system. This would also apply to technical standards that may be used for your design, which would be like codes and standards. That would be IEEE standards. That could be American National Institute standards. That could be ASME standards. There are hundreds of standards organizations out there, and depending upon a company's products or services and their offerings to their customers, they may have to incorporate dozens of standards, if not hundreds. And this is an area that could put a company at risk if the technical requirements are not integrated into the management system. So from what I've observed in management system, these are areas that typically change quite a bit. And if you look at your objectives, and if you have dynamic objectives that will change from time to time, that may drive a change in some of the other items that are mentioned here. And so the more frequently you look at your quality objectives and you monitor your quality objectives, the more potential for change. And then after integrating the change, there'll be evaluation of the implementation of the change. And that would be through section 9.3 performance evaluation as a whole, but minimally through your internal audit system, analysis of the evaluation, and management review. So it doesn't mean that you have to do an internal audit every year. Some companies may do them monthly. Some companies may do a full-blown quality management system a couple times a year. It really depends upon your internal needs. ISO 9001 doesn't specify a frequency, and that would be same thing for analysis, and that would be the same thing for management review. I would expect analysis would be as performed as frequently as needed, depending upon what your quality objectives are. If you're looking at process industries, there's process software that identifies the chemical makeup of a process product like cement, and they'll know what the product analysis is by sight on an ongoing basis, minute to minute. And process tweaks can be made after taking laboratory samples. So if you're looking at improvement, looking at analysis, there's a kit here. It's called the Standard Toolkit from Space. This organization, you can see they encourage the use of the supply chain progress towards aeronautic community excellence through the use of this publication. There is the webpage where you can find that, or you can just type in Space Standards Toolkit and PDF after it, and you'll find it quite quickly. And there's a statement within that publication. They would like that publication to be passed around as much as possible to encourage companies to use those techniques. So those are some ways to help integrate the changes to ISO 9001 and help you rely on your system in order to make business decisions. So that's about all I have for right now. So we're willing to start taking some questions. Here's a quick overview of everything that we looked at here in this presentation.
Thank you, Buck, for taking time out to share your knowledge here. I have one question that someone asked in reference to 9001 2015. Since it's scalable to the various industries, does it allow for an organization to consider its own KPIs when developing their QMS?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, that's what's encouraged. So it depends on the short answer is yes, it does. So it depends on what you call KPI. Some refer KPIs as being customer key performance indicators for a service, and there's also quality objectives, and companies have goals. So I don't think it really matters what your vernacular is and what you call them, or if you have different levels of objectives or KPIs. It allows you to produce the KPIs that are necessary. A lot of organizations will take that from the strategic direction of the company and what the company's goals are. And from those goals will be passed down to department for the departments to identify how they're going to meet their goals within the time period that top management has specified. And from that, you can create whatever goal, KPIs are necessary for measurement.
Thank you, sir. Another quick question. Someone asks, will the PowerPoint version of this be available? We are recording this particular seminar, and we will make it available here in the future. We will have some edits that we will have to do to it, but yes, a copy of this recorded presentation will be available in the near future here. Also, for those who are interested in reference to the PDH certificates, PDH certificates will be issued to all registered and attending participants to this webinar. And so let me explain that a little bit more. Registered means that you register for this webinar. Attending means that you attend the majority of the webinar. Sometimes we have discussions on individuals who are able to sign in for about 5 minutes and still expect to get a PDH certificate. And so please remember that you will receive a PDH certificate for attending the majority of this webinar. And the webinar will automatically be able to detect who's coming in and out. All right, but I have another question for you here. How is ISO 9001 2015 used to achieve zero defects as needed in the automotive and aerospace and oil and gas industries?
I'm not sure zero defects exist. The concept of zero defects, I believe, came from the military industry back in the 1960s. And I would think you would want to lead more towards Six Sigma and applying Six Sigma to those industries to achieve the lessening of your defects and bring them down as low as possible.
I would tend to have to agree with you there, Bud. Being a Six Sigma black belt, that is part of the toolkits. They talk about achieving a Six Sigma in your process, which is about out of 3.4 thousand operations, you're having about 6 defects. So yes. Any other questions that anybody has out there?
So, Chris, I would like to point out one thing regarding that last question.
Mhm.
So, this is also showing the flexibility of ISO 9001, right? And this is what is making it the standard of the future, because you can incorporate Six Sigma, you can incorporate business continuity, you can incorporate any business item that you really want your management system to cover. In with some quality management system standards, uh, they don't apply to the accounting department or billing department. But a lot of companies find it valuable to have written procedures and methods that are published that everybody knows in those departments. So again, it depends on how the company wants to, how far they want to integrate the quality management system standard into their organization.
Okay. Thank you, Bud. Actually, I'd like to reiterate what I said earlier. It's 3.4 defects for every 1 million operations to get to minimizing your defects as a Six Sigma process. I had a little brain collapse there for a moment. But I have a question for you. In reference to, you mentioned about all these different systems. Is there a management system or software programs out there to help people manage these different parts of the operation?
Yes, I think it depends. There's quite a few software out there, uh, software applications, and it depends on what you're looking for. So, like CAPA, corrective action, preventive action, although preventive action in 9001 is now risk, there are corrective action systems out there that track corrective actions. There are non-conformance applications. Some software companies have audit applications. There's applications for your approved vendors list and identifying critical suppliers. There's different quality calendars that are out there, calibration, maintenance, purchasing. So there are many different types of software out there. You would have to do some searching on the net. As an example, we have some applications that we've developed ourselves, but another good location to find it would be, I'm not sure if you've heard of the Gartner reports. It's Gartner, and Gartner publishes management system software guide as well.
Great, Bud. Really appreciate that. I have another question here. Is that in the oil and gas, many organizations request an API 2 certification. How does ISO 9001:2015 compare to API 2, and is is it an adequate substitute?
Okay, so that's an interesting question. So I think you're talking about API spec Q2 for service, I'm assuming.
Yes, sir. I think so. Yes.
Okay, so there's a parallel between them, although Q2 does not claim to be in conformance with ISO 9001. There's the API Q1, which is going from the 9th edition to the 10th edition as we speak, right? Hopefully be published sometime this year or early next year, and it will incorporate ISO 9001:2015. A really interesting standard is ISO 29001. I'm not sure if you've heard of that standard, but it's being pushed. I shouldn't use that word pushed. It's being facilitated and rolled out by the European oil and gas industry. And it's quality management systems for oil and gas. And basically what it does is it has ISO 9001:2015 layout. And underneath each element, they identify the API spec Q1 and API spec Q2 criteria. So that might be something interesting to look at if you want a full-blown quality management system that meets ISO 9001, API spec Q1, and API spec Q2. The question is, could ISO 9001 be a replacement for Q2 or a suitable alternative? I would have to say no. The reason I would say that, particularly when it comes down to service, if you look at service as it's identified in ISO 9001, and I just went through this within the last 2 weeks with a big service organization, and they haven't adopted Q2, but they have service under ISO 9001. And what you miss is all the opportunities that Q2 brings you. So if you look at a standard and you start doing a word search for different words and build a matrix of what some of the primary words are in the standard, such as the word quality, such as the word customer, and you'll see which way that standard leans, right? So all those standards are definitely customer centric. ISO 9001 mentions the word service somewhere around 30 times. However, when you get to API spec Q2, it mentions it somewhere around 178 times. So you can see there's a great disparity just with that one word. Okay. I'm not saying it's not suitable and it can't be used, but if you're going to be in the oil field performing a service, I think it'd be more prudent to use Q2 specifically with the level of risk involved, right? There's much more risk. And I think Q2 leads you into that direction and helps you understand that risk better than 9001 does.
Great, thank you, Bud. I have a couple more questions here. How can an engineer present this information to upper management uh, to implement some of these policies?
Is that meaning like for Q1, Q2, 9001?
Yes, sir. ISO 9001 to upper management.
I think, there's several ways. One way you could do it is take a look at who your competitors are and take a look at api.org. And in the center of their navigation screen, the center of the top 1/4 of the homepage, in the center will say products and services. Then once you click on that, that'll be broken down into 3 or 4 columns. On the far right side, you'll see something called the API composite list. And the API composite list identifies all those companies that have an API license to manufacture product, which means they have the right to put API's monogram on the product in accordance with the product specification and API's licensing requirements. But it also identifies those companies that just have Q1, or those companies that just have Q2, or those companies that have a combination of any of those things, right? And when you bounce that against over 100 product specifications that are under what's called the API monogram program, Q1 is mandatory to use. But when you look at Q1 quality management certification, that comes under API quality registrars. And so you can take a look by region, by country, and certification, and find out if your competitors are in there. Another way would be to look at some success stories that have been published on why Q2 is important. And I think it'd be very helpful. If you want to have another conversation about that in a little bit more depth, feel free to contact me via my email, and perhaps we could set up a conference call and I could walk you through some other ideas.
Great there, Bud. I think that your email address is there in the last slide here. And for those of you who are not able to see it, it is budqsi@qualifiedspecialist.com. I have another question for you. I think that you alluded to it earlier. Is the Annex L the ISO 9015? I guess everyone's asking, what is Annex L to the ISO 9015?
No, there actually, it used to be Annex SL, like Sierra Leone, but now they're recently changed it to Annex L, and it's part of ISO Directive 1. So you could go to ISO, purchase their directives. They have several directives on how they run business, and it's part of their strategy on renumbering. And also, there are some draft copies, I think, that are published on the internet that you might be able to look for, but I would look for Annex SL, like Sierra Leone, because the L may or may not be published out on the net yet.
Okay, I think this may be the last question here. Is there a specific risk assessment tool you would suggest to include in the management of change?
A lot of companies look at likelihood and severity with a risk matrix with red, yellow, and green. And that seems to be a common one. And there's a lot of them that are published on the internet by companies that you could see. There's one that I found, and it was in an unexpected location. It was through the Bureau of Land Management and the Bureau of Native American Affairs. And if you look up health and safety or risk on that website, it'll take you to their risk management tools. And it's all for health and safety, but the cool part about it is some companies do not identify what a high risk means. They'll give it a number, but in this case, they actually identify that it could, a risk of the highest likelihood, that they'll call it a significant risk, could cause death or dismemberment or maiming somebody, something like this. And so you could see how they present the 5 levels of risk they have, and you could take that information and modify that idea into what your product or service, what would be a risk for your product or service, high risk versus low risk, right? And so that seems to be very popular. And then the other standard I mentioned, I think it was, let me double check, was that 3104, I believe it is, and IEC 3104. That, I'm sorry, 31004. And it's guidance for the implementation of ISO 9000 or 31001. And there's the IEC 31010, and it has many different risk assessment techniques. And there's quite a few of them I've never heard of. And it comes out of different industries. So that is a super tool as well. So having said that, and with the Bureau of Land Management Search for Risk, those would be a couple good resources to use.
Sounds like a lot of nomenclatures.
Oh, say it again?
I said there's a number of different structures that you named in reference to ISO 9001, 2015, and some of the other APIs. I see this getting very complex for someone who's just entering into this.
Oh, it's like alphabet soup for sure.
So you've been doing this for a number of years, but has there been anything that has surprised you in your 40 plus years of doing this?
Well, I think it has. ISO 9001 2015 surprised me. And the more I got to apply it, the more I got to use it. The deeper I dug, my tongue's twisted there. The deeper I dig into it, the more I learned about it. And the architects of it did a really good job. And the way they thought it through with the Annex L, the way they thought it through with the core information being used in 47 of the standards, the concepts that they use are really interesting. I think a lot of companies haven't taken it to its full breadth on how far this thing can go. And the limit is your imagination in reality. So it doesn't tell you have to have X amount of documented procedures. It mentions documented information somewhere around 30 times. And they discuss retain or maintain to differ. You need a document procedure or a record. But then again, that's based upon the risk the organization has and whether or not they need to document a procedure. So it's flexible. It can be used for almost anything, but the more boundaries you put upon yourself that are reasonable. I'm not talking about that we always do this one way. If you look at other ISO 9001, API Q1, there's somewhere around a couple hundred times each of the standards mentioned the word SHALL. If you take each one of those shalls as risk statement, if you don't address it, what is the risk? And if you draw a boundary around that shall and say, like issuing a requisition for purchasing, we always use this form. Well, what happens if there's a different department? They're using an alternate form that purchasing has approved. Now you just shot yourself in the foot. What you could say is we use one or more of the following methods, right? So it makes the standard a little bit more flexible for your own use. And then there's some discussion in some ISO publications that talks about risk. If you look at the word risk, it's used somewhere around 16 times in 9001 2015. But they also talk about the words as applicable and as appropriate being a risk. That means if the company includes in their manual or procedures as applicable or as appropriate and doesn't say how to do it, that represents a risk, because if positions are changed, if new people come in, as applicable or as appropriate may be different from somebody that's just been in a position for 1 year versus somebody that's a seasoned professional in that one particular area. So that's why it's necessary to take a look at how you use the standard. But I would, if you want more about this, I would suggest looking not just about the benefits of ISO 9001, because you get a lot of the same type text. You might want to look at innovative ways to use ISO 9001 and broaden it from there. So that's my bit of surprise that coming out of the standard in 40 years. And it's matured tremendously. And so, standards have, quality management system standards have. So I think it's a real opportunity for companies. And, even if you have other systems in place that you may be required to use by regulatory requirements, and if ISO 9001 isn't included in that, I would recommend trying to incorporate 9001 with it because of the benefits you get out of it.
Well, let me ask you this, Bud. This is the last question, and it kind of ties into what you just shared with us. Can you provide an example of an industry trend or change as a result of the coronavirus that impacted the oil and gas industry or any other industry?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Supply chain, right? So I recently wrote an article, and on LinkedIn, there is a users group, and we haven't had a whole lot of traction in it yet, but it's auditors within the oil and gas industry. And it's called that because I spent a lot of time in the oil and gas industry. It's open to anybody who wants to join it. And in there, I published an article about taking a look at your supply chain in the rearview mirror. In other words, using hindsight to do a risk assessment. What does that mean? So if you do a risk assessment on supply chain prior to COVID, we didn't have a crystal ball to predict this thing when the pandemic hit. But now if we're asked to do a risk assessment on supply chain during the COVID era, oh my, it's a little bit different. So you're having manpower issues, you're having difficulties people reaching their job, you're having shortages, due to hoarding or due to not being able to get the materials because plants like in the oil and gas industry, plants have had contingency plans for, let's say, they can't get steel from a steel mill because the steel mill shut down because of COVID. So they have to buy from other suppliers in other locations. So that would be a good article to look at to give you some ideas on maybe how to go back after risk.
Well, thank you, but I'm reminded, I used to work for a company, I won't say its name, but it actually manufactured buildings, outdoor buildings in the electrical industry. And we actually, in order for us to even bid on projects, they asked us to fill out a questionnaire about our QMS system, what standards and the procedures we had in place, understand if anything went wrong in our processes, how we would respond. And this document would take us a week or so to actually fill out in order for us to even receive a RFQ from the company or RFP, I should say, request for proposal. And so the advantages of really having a system in place and understanding those different things can really also add value when you're selling your product or service internally or externally to the general industry.
Right. And I think, it depends on the company. So some send a questionnaire and they may or may not do any further check-in if a company has an ISO certification. So I think it's important to do some due diligence, even with a company has any kind of certification. Some companies get a certification to have a certification, and they may not really be using the standard, not just ISO, any standard, to its fullest capacity, if that makes sense. So their intentions may not be improving product, continual improvement. How do you get continual improvement? It's through those last, 4 or 5 slides I showed you on the changes and, keeping those areas active and rolling and, documenting MOCs and risks where you need them and integrating the changes. Keep up with top management, what the strategy changes are. I mean, a lot of my leads to customers come from the sales department, if you can believe that, because, the sales folks are out in the front line and our customers are saying, hey, do you have this? Do you have that? And so I get a large percentage of referrals by salespeople.
Interesting. But this is my last question. It's kind of a personal. One of our partnerships for this webinar is through NESME Process Improvement SIG. And one of the things that we did recently was actually go out and ask our general membership as well as some other organizations about the trending in reference to job opportunity. And one of the things that came up was lead auditor. And that's one of the reasons why I reached out to you, knowing that your expertise in this area. And just looking at your qualifications, do you think, is it worth the investment of getting that credential, and what is your viewpoint on that credential in the marketplace?
I think it's very valuable. It's never too late to start. I've known, several associates that might be a little bit older than I am, and they're they're going to semi-retire. And so what they've done is they've obtained their lead auditor certification for quality management systems, environmental management systems, and health and safety management systems. So that's the trifecta of auditor qualifications, right? So basically what that means, if you're getting ready to retire or semi-retire, you can always get a job with a registration company, right? There's hundreds of registration companies that are out there internationally. When you get an auditor certification, either through, the more recognized organizations are something like Exemplar Global and IRCA, which stands for the Institute of Registered Certificated Auditors out of the UK. And those are two of the most popular ones. And it's a good career path. They have like standard industrial classifications, although I don't think that term's used anymore. But they'll have like maybe 100 different types of industries that you can get into. Like, so basic metals, electrical components, power plants, electricity, things like that. So you would identify your specialty. So you can actually start doing your work for becoming an auditor, and you could probably get an auditor certification quicker by starting with the American Society for Quality Certified Quality Auditor Certification. ASQ has tons of information on it. ASQ CQA is recognized by Exemplar Global as partially meeting some of their requirements for being a certified auditor. So I've been to 30 countries doing work over the years. And I would say a large part of it is due to the certifications that I have. And it's showing that you have a minimum understanding of something. And as you graduate up from auditor to lead auditor and things of this nature, it gets better. And out of all the audits I've done over all these years, I always learn something new. It's a fascinating career, and it gets you into places that you never thought you'd see. It gets you into processes that you may never see again. And it's really a fascinating thing. If you have an inquisitive mind, this is something you might want to look at. Chris, weren't we talking about maybe a presentation on that?
Yes, sir. I would like to burden you, if you don't mind. I would like to, when we originally started talking about this, we talked about a 3-part series, and I think that should definitely be one of the series that we should talk about.
I don't mind that a lot. I mean, in fact, we do lead auditor class. We licensed through API. However, what I try to do with everybody that comes through our class, and a lot of people I know in industry, is to try to help people get started in being an auditor. Right? It's worth the investment in that time to see somebody get a new career and be able to fall back on that position. So there's no place, like any place in the world you go, they're going to need an auditor. I worked with a guy in the nuclear industry, and I found out he was working for the Texas Bureau of Prisons doing audits. What kind? I have no idea. but he was doing those audits. You never know. It comes up with some really interesting stuff that's out there. And I'm not sure how many folks have heard of the Quality Council of Indiana.
Yes.
These guys are great. They have preparatory materials for a lot of the ASQ certifications. And it's good to, let's say you're going to get the Certified Quality Auditor certification. It's good to go over that material and it's as a review, take the sample examinations. And they sit for the test, actually. They go through this every year and they update their tests. Take their examinations, find out what your weak areas are, concentrate on improving those weak areas. And then if you want some other information from ASQ, they got, a really nice, it's probably 2.5 inch or 3 inch binder of, auditor class, auditor lessons and things like that. It's a really good publication. So there's a couple ideas for you.
I really appreciate that, but actually that's one of the initiatives of the NSB PI SIG is to look at identifying programs and partnering to facilitate those programs for our membership.
I think it's important. I think it's important not only for career development, it's important for people to feel good about themselves, achieving something new. And it's like we were talking a little bit this morning, Chris, before the presentation, I found myself in some areas that I never would have thought I'd have been in, right? The Alaska pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
who would have thought that? Doing a right-of-way renewal with a team of 12 people and me leading the thing, doing some post 3 Mile Island investigations via an audit at South Texas Nuclear Project for bulk material and fasteners. I mean, these are sometimes once in a lifetime chances that you can get. And it's really fascinating. And when you get involved with it, it may be scary, but that's the fun part about it is you learn more, right? And to me, it tends to make me dig deeper, and then you feel good about the job you did.
Well, I am fortunate, Bud, to have you as a friend, so that if I do get that opportunity, I can always give you a call to give me some help and guidance.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate your time this afternoon, Bud. I thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. Again, this is part one of a three-part series. A couple of weeks here, but we have been asking for, and we'll be doing this again soon. With that being said, Daryl, thank you for all of your help and support in IEEE USA. And we thank again our partnerships with IEEE USA, IEEE Houston section, as well as the NESB PI SIG. And thank you again, Bud, for all your help and support.
Anytime. It's my pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
With that being said, Daryl, this concludes our webinar.